Hello and welcome. I'm going to be talking about custom importers. Custom Importers 101. So of course, thank you to the sponsors. Without them, we wouldn't be here. Shout out to Northern, which is where I work. My name is Jordan Thompson. I'm a Drupal Solutions Lead at Northern. I'd like to consider myself a level 9 Drupaler. So I've been doing this for about 9 years now. And yeah, I've learned quite a bit, and this is one of the things. So let's just get into it. So agenda today, we're going to talk about what are importers, available import methods, why make a custom importer, a walkthrough of creating a custom importer, import scheduling animation, and gotchas. There's going to be a lot of screenshots of code, not screenshots of code, but lots of code, but I'll walk everyone through, and hopefully it's cool. So, what are importers? Tools that we can use to process large amounts of data, right? So if we want to, migrate something or bring something into a site, we're going to import that in, migrate that in somehow from external sources. But we want to control how it's coming in, maybe massage some of that data, right? We're not just pulling it in wholesale and just shoving it into our website. We want to kind of control a little bit of that. So available import methods. And now this is not an exhaustive list. This is just kind of like the default. Feeds. Also, they've changed the feeds logo, and it looks much scarier now. So I use the old feeds logo because it's so cute, is it not? It says "it feeds," which is cute. I was gonna get a screenshot of the new one. It's terrifying. It looks like an AI made it. So we have feeds, right? So it allows for importing, aggregating data into nodes and users, say taxonomy terms, other entities. It can work with different formats. It has a user interface. It's nice and handy for site builders and whatnot, right? So pretty cool. So yeah, there's that. There's also feeds tamper. I'll just put a little tamper on there. So if, out of the box feeds doesn't have what you want, you can tamper. So you can modify that data before it's being saved. You can do kind of different data transformations. There's lots of different plugins that come out of the box with tamper, but there's also additional plugins that you can make yourself to add in additional functionality. If you have like a custom approach or you want to do something hyper specific, you can make your own plugin and put it in there. And I think there's probably lots of examples online of other people doing specific kind of tampers. So you're like, oh, hey, this guy was doing something. I'll steal his code and I'll do my tamper. I guess first, sorry, quick question. Who's used feeds before? Hands. Hell yeah. Who's used feeds tamper before? Sweet. Who's used migrate before? So there's also migrate, right? Old handy dandy migrate. It's been around forever. Framework for defining and managing a migration process. Drupal core comes with the migrate and some migrate modules out of the box. So we have migrate, which provides the framework. We have migrate Drupal, so it's specifically for migrating from older Drupal versions. The UI for it, specifically a source CSV, which allows you to do for sources CSV, and then migrate tools, so just adds a little bit more tools and plugins and usage for you as well. However, whoever's used migrate knows it's quite like a monolithic, big kind of thing to use, but it is quite handy, quite custom. And then lastly, but not least, is the Q API. So this is what we're going to really be focusing on today. This API to handle a large number of tasks at a later stage. So queue system is literally what it sounds like. You queue everything up, and we can process them as we need to, and we can process them later, we can process them now. And we make sure that we're consuming kind of one at a time. Right, so we're just like, okay, next in line, let's go. So it's a first in, first out methodology. And it leverages Drupal core's Qt interface, which is comprised of methods such as create item, claiming item, deleting item, releasing item. So we'll kind of get a little bit more into that as we go. So why make a custom importer? And again, these are my opinions, so don't take this like, oh, this is the way that you should do this always. But my opinion, feeds might be too limited, right? There's only so much you can do with feeds, even with a tamper. There's only so much you can do. There's only so much custom code you want to write to then feed into that and hopefully make it work. So, you know, we might be limited. It's good for you, easy stuff, you know, simple CSV, pop it in, maybe we capitalize something, call it a day. But once we're kind of getting a little bit more crazy, maybe multiple sources, we might have a hard time. Migrate framework, steep learning curve. Like, probably a very, very steep learning curve. We have people that are like, that person knows migrations, and the rest of us are like, God help them, because they know what they're doing, and they're into it, but if we try to look at their migrations, it's a lot. And it also requires lots of plugins that you want to need to leverage. So, especially if you need functionality that doesn't exist, you have to create your own custom plugins, which may or may not be intuitive to build, might be difficult to test, kind of a lengthy process. And also, I find too that it typically requires multiple migrations. So you have to, you know, run, say, a migration to import the taxonomy, and then you have to run the migration that imports the node that then references the taxonomy. So there's a bit of an order thing to it, right? And if you run them out of order, then, oh, I'm trying to reference something that doesn't exist yet, and then you're having a whole trouble. So trying to figure all that out can be kind of a mess. And then there's custom importers using the Q API. So you really have full control because it is pure custom. So you can do whatever you want. You can perform multiple tasks in the same import run. So if you need to create those taxonomy terms while you're creating those nodes, no problem, I can do both. I can do all those dependencies as I'm doing things. And you can also combine import sources. Let's say, you know, you have a CSV, but oh, I need an API call to understand what this field is, or for extra data. I can call these sources at the same time, and I don't have to multiple run. I can get all the things I need in one call, which is pretty cool. So let's walk through, shall we? So one thing I always recommend is creating an administration form. This is kind of a basic one. Whether or not, so this is an example of an import file, so maybe someone's importing a specific file. But whether or not it's a file or maybe it's a URL from, like, you know, custom API or something like that, allowing someone to be able to trigger it manually is really important, I find, because, you know, sometimes, and we'll get into kind of scheduling later, but sometimes you want to run it now. And you're like, well, I don't want to wait till, you know, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I want to run it right now because, like, something needs to be updated. Your administrators can do that. They can go click the button and magic, it runs. So, or they can, you know, add a new file and they can do that. Or maybe they have to edit the URL, something like that. So, as opposed to kind of hard coding everything. Something that's key, I find, is creating like an import manager service. It's really the central source of all your import information and really the structure to the backbone of everything. So it contains functions to populate your queues, helper functions such as validation that I'm going to get into as well. So really key to kind of have that service helping you along the way. So one thing that I like to do is create like an import information mapping. So we can have even multiple imports in this mapping. So you can kind of see here, for example, I have like my title, that's for like logging and whatnot. Maybe I have different directories where I'm storing files, and then once I've imported them, I move them to a different folder, but I've tracked all that. I have an expected header, which we'll get into when we're doing validation. And then we're defining our queues, which again we'll also get into. So it's just a nice kind of constant of like, this is like my map that I'm going to use all over the place. And it's my one-stop shop of all the information I need right here. So getting into the file validation, that's very important, right? So if someone's, say, importing a CSV, we've got to make sure the business rules are being followed. They can't just import whatever they want and hope for the best. So make sure that you're defining clear business rules before you're running an import. Common issues that we can find are incorrect file delimiters and incorrect file headers. So if there's very particular file headers that you're trying to find, or file delimiters, you're going to have a bad time if they're like, they want to use a pipe instead of a comma, or a comma instead of a pipe, or they've changed one of the columns and now you're not importing that anymore. So a really handy tool that I've used is League CSV. It is kind of specific for CSVs, but it's really handy for breaking that down and lots of different functionality to help you in validation, and just reading it in general is really handy. So covering delimiter validation. So again, validate that the file delimiter is actually the one you expect. A mismatched delimiter can cause your import to just not read the data properly, right? So again, you're expecting a comma, but maybe it's by pipe. Then you're going to parse it, and you're going to get your like array after. It's going to be all mismatched and all garbled because you're not delimiting it properly. Something that's really handy that Leak CSV has is a function called getDelimiterStats. So you can say, hey, is this delimiter even being used in the file? And if it is, tell me about it. Now the only downside, I'll note, is that if you don't ask it to, like it'll only check the delimiters that you ask it to do. So let's say that like one line was pipe delimited, but the rest of them are comma delimited. You ask if it's comma delimited, say, well, yeah, I found lots of commas, but it might not catch the pipes, for example, because it's like, it's just checking if they're there, not like if it's the only one there, if that makes sense. So just a warning, disclaimer on that. But just a little bit of code snippet here. So let's say we get our data. We can create a reader. So the reader is coming from Leak CSV as well. So it's reading in our data. We can set it in closure, so we know everything's inside of the double quote. And then we can get those delimiter stats. And then, oh, sorry. This CSV should say reader, my bad, in the code there. But so then we check, see if our delimiter is being used. Again, we're using our import manager. We've defined constants in there, so we're not hard coding our delimiter everywhere, and we can reference it wherever we need to. Again, coming from the import manager. So then if we, in this example, if we find our delimiter, we're considering this to be a valid, our valid delimiter, and if we can't find it, then we're considering it to not be valid. Now getting into header validation. So again, when the header doesn't match, you might have a bad time. If there's a typo in one of the columns, maybe you import all the data, but now you've missed a whole column. Now you got to do the whole import again to then grab that column back, right? Or maybe you have a CSV for maybe just that one column, but you're just going to have more issues, more errors. So again, trying to catch that early, especially if say your import takes a long time. What if your import takes like 8 hours and you're like, oh, I just found out that it didn't import half of it because someone put a spelling mistake in all these headers. I got to run it again. So we want to catch that early. So something that we can do, now that we know that our delimiter is there, we can set that, and then we can kind of grab the first row there using that first method, and then we can kind of loop and just kind of see, does it match our expected header? So again, our expected header coming from our import manager, which is then passed in as kind of this import information here. So we check, does it match our expected header? Let's see if it does. And if it does, we're good. If it doesn't, tell the user which ones are mismatched, right? Because if they say, oh, doesn't match, I don't know what's wrong, that might not help. But in this way, it'll kind of say, hey, these three are missing, or these three are maybe spelled wrong, or something like that. Take a look. So very helpful, especially when it's in the UI, and it says, hey, you're missing column X, column Y, column Z. So I find that very handy. And I often have situations where client says, hey, can you just validate that I did this right before we start to run? I run it through this, everything all checks out, say good to go, okay, we can start it. But if I say, hey, you missed something, I send it back and they say, oh, yep, I missed something, fix it, send back, we validate. Again, they can validate themselves as well, but just another set of eyes always helps, right? So once we've actually validated that we want to use this file, we want to actually populate our queues. So now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. Because I know validation's all fun, but queues are more fun. So we want to read in that source data. We want to create an initial queue from that data. And then if you have multiple queues that you want to process, you can chain them by leveraging the batch API. Who's used the batch API before? Hell yeah. So we're going to kind of walk through a data queue populate function here. And it's quite large, so it'll kind of span a couple slides, but we'll kind of go through it. So first things first, we're passing in some import information and maybe some file information. So first things first, we're going to grab our queues. Again, we have, and I'll kind of go into it, but we have our get queue and our save queue. And what we're doing here is we're getting the queues based on our input information, and we're clearing them out. So you can see here, we're doing this delete queue method. That'll clear out the queues. So in case you had like a half-run import or something like that, and you don't want to re-import that maybe messy data, just deletes them all. Something I should have also noted, all of these queues live in the queue database table. So that's also where like cron jobs go sometimes, or other kind of batch tasks. So it just goes then and says, okay, find all the machine, or the name that matches my queue, delete them, get them out of there. Because again, they might be wrong, they might be mismatched, and whatnot. So we delete those for the get, we delete those for the save. And then we start populating. So we're saying, okay, I want to create a queue item. I'm going to use, I'm going to put those, create like the get, and I'm going to give you my file information. So again, we're creating operations for our batch that we're going to get to. So it's going to populate our get queue. Oh, and I should mention too, this is in the import manager. So then once we've done that, we can then create an operation for our get queue, create an operation for our save queue. So those are both going to be processing items. So once we've populated the get queue, we process it. Once we populate the save queue, we process it. So we keep going. And then once we've made all our operations, we patch it to the batch and set it free. So we have our batch, we give it the operations, and we say batch set. So getting into the get queue. So once the get queue is populated, so we'll populate that get queue using the operations there. And then once it's populated, so it's responsible for parsing and preparing the data for the save queue. So preparing that data could be string manipulation, so using stir to lower, stir to upper, anything like that. Mapping values, a lot of time booleans come in as like a n or a y, but we can't do anything with that, so we have to translate that to like a 1 or a 0, true, false, something like that. Maybe even structuring or pairing data. So let's say you have a lat long pair. Those are coming in 2 different columns. We want to combine those in like a little array. Maybe it's a date range. Maybe it's a smart date range. Shout out to Martin. Maybe it's translations, right? So we need to kind of prep that because they're all going to be coming in separate columns. So we want to kind of pair those, kind of bundle them up, make them look pretty for when we're ready to go. So breaking it down even further, the get queue is typically comprised of a base class and a manual class. Why they're named that way, don't ask me, those are the names, I know. So the base class is an abstract class that extends the queueworker class, or queueworker base class rather. This is where the generic get queue functionality will be, such as parsing the data and creating the queue items for the save queue. The manual class, however, will then have any kind of overridden bits for specific mapping and processing. So you can have one base and multiple manuals. So that one base can handle, say you're importing, node type of something, and then you want to, import a different kind of thing or something from a different source, but they're still using the same kind of base. But the mapping's completely different, right? Could be for specific content types, could be for something else. But again, using the same base functionality. So, just to kind of throw it in here, we have our construct, our constructor, just to kind of show, because there's going to be referencing some of these things, so I want to put it in here. So for example, we can determine the bundle, we can determine our expected file delimiter, and a number of rows. So I'll kind of explain that in a second, but we're going to kind of group some things together, and also grab our queue that we're going to be populating, so the save queue. Then we get into our methods. So we have our process item, our parse CSV data, clean index, a process data that we're specifically going to override. However, it could do its own stuff too, right? If we say we did not want to override it in the manual, we could leverage the base. And maybe sometimes we override it. But typically I like to override it just because usually it's very specific. And then we have a create save queue item, which is pretty self-explanatory. So let's dive into those. So our process item, it grabs the records from our parse CSV data, And then it's going to clean up the header keys. So again, kind of similar to what we were doing when we were validating. It's just, if they're all capitals or weird cases, we're going to make them machine names, right? So that they can get a little closer to our field values. And if we get into parse CSV, this is where leak CSV comes back into the picture. So we're creating a string from that data, we're setting a delimiter, setting an enclosure, setting a header offset, and then kind of processing that record. So kind of grabbing all the records from our data. And then there's the clean index, so just kind of noting that we're calling that as well in the clean headers there. This can be whatever you want. Specifically what I'm doing is converting just to lowercase, removing spaces, at any kind of trimming, switching spaces to underscore, and kind of removing any weird special characters. But you could probably have anything you want in here. Just kind of like sanitize, because something might be coming in weird. Then kind of getting back into the process item. So typically, we could make a save queue item per row in our CSV, but that's going to make hundreds of save queue items, which is not really efficient. We don't need to do one thing at a time. So we can group them. So kind of remember we had that item number of rows before, so we're going to group them in hundreds. You can group them in more, it really kind of depends on performance. The higher you go, the more it has to do. So your number may vary, but we're going to group them. So we're going to grab them, we're going to get those records, loop over the record, and then we're going to kind of figure out, how those map to the header keys, and then put them together. So then we are going to call the process data. So we process it, we map it, do any of that kind of massaging, if you will, and then if we've added enough to our group, we're going to send it off to our create save queue. So again, the process data is very specific, so I don't have a specific example, but again, mapping, right? We want to kind of combine things together. So our save queue item, we're just creating, an object, throwing a key on it, so maybe we're throwing our bundle in there, the data we need, and we're creating that item. So then that's going to have all of the parsed, pre-parsed, pre-massaged data in one queue item in the database. And then let's say, you had a file of like 5,000 rows, then it's going to create 50 of these save queue items. And again, yes, so we have our manual class, whatever processing you need to do based on business requirements. So we've made the save queue. We got to process those. So it's responsible for saving anything that we get from the get queue. So prior to saving the data, we can actually then check whether or not the content already exists, maybe based on specific, like an import ID, or a combination of unique data points, so we're not duplicating data. If the content doesn't exist, we create it. If it does exist, we update it. If there's a content reference, let's create that content that it's trying to reference first, and then create the content, the original content. And you can also create translations at the same time, which is pretty handy. Again, not limited to that list, but that's kind of the basics. So again, following a very similar pattern, the save queue is comprised of a base and a manual. So the base is an abstract class. Again, extending the queue worker base. This is where all the generic things go. Determining whether or not to create or update. And then handling, creating, updating references. It's going to be very generic with its functions. The manual is where we have very specific field mapping. So in that, again, that can be created if there's, multiple manual classes can be created. So, if you have, say, two different kinds of things you need to do on the get, the two manuals on the get, you would have a manual save that is kind of its counterpart, right? So in the save queue base class, we have our constructor. So typically I like to use compare fields or compare columns. That's going to contain our unique ID here. And then we have some functions. So we have a process item, we have a get mapping, so that's going to be the one that we're going to be overriding in our manual. We have a get node ID, we have a create node, and we have an update node. So in the process item, not shown in the slide, it'll call the get node ID using the compare fields and say, hey, does this import ID exist, or does this like, something exists with this value? And if it does, it'll say, okay, here's the node ID. And if it returns that node ID, it's going to update it. If it can't find that node ID, it's going to create a new one. And then there's some mapping helper functions that are pretty handy. So, and we'll kind of describe what's really kind of going on in here. So I like to break it down at least into these three categories. So we have direct mapping, so like string to string, or numbers, right? Really easy stuff. That's just, this is going in the database. I don't need to do any extra work. Then we got taxonomy. Not so easy, right? You can't just say, oh, it's in the database. We got to create that taxonomy term first, return the ID, and then we're referencing that. So that's going to do all that work for us. There's also multiple more functions that do that, but the one that determines kind of the upper bit there is our taxonomy mapping. So it'll say, hey, does a taxonomy exist? And that will also have kind of a compare fields of like, oh, that has an import ID. Do I find a taxonomy that exists with that import ID or that name specific for this vocabulary? If it does, grab the ID, return it. If it doesn't, I create it, return that ID. And now I can then bring it back to our update or our create and use that value. And then the content mapping. So that is if you need to create different content that's not taxonomy specifically. So like maybe you have to create another node. Maybe you have to create some paragraphs, right? So that'll also handle that, because again, we have to create those things, pass back the ID or the revision ID for paragraphs, and then we can reference it first. So again, in our manual, we can define our compare fields, our compare columns. So it's really kind of saying like that's the field we care about in Drupal. That's the column that's coming in from our source data. And then we can have kind of our arrays here of what's kind of the direct mapping. So it's like, name coming in from the file actually equals the title and stuff like that. And then taxonomies has a kind of a different approach. I probably should have put a little bit more detail in those too, but that's okay. I do kind of have a custom style way of doing those, of kind of mapping like which taxonomy it belongs to. And for the content, it's like which paragraph type it is and that kind of stuff. So it does have some information as well. So queues aren't necessarily limited to get and save, but they're pretty common and they're kind of the bare minimum in my opinion. But we can have other queues that maybe have to run before, after, in between get and save. Maybe there's a clean queue that deletes content after. So, what if we're importing content from a file that's kind of our source of truth, and then, oh, I didn't import like 5 things from that file, or like from the first file, say I imported 100 things, the second file only has 95, well maybe I should delete those 5 things because I don't care about those things anymore. We'll clean that up, we'll do some kind of garbage cleanup. So maybe that's a queue that runs after the save, right? Maybe we track which ones we're keeping track of. We can also maybe delete an orphan reference. So if we, and we deleted the node, maybe we also delete all the paragraphs if no one else is referencing that paragraph anymore, something like that. There's also the update queue. So, maybe after some kind of content has been created or updated, we need to use some other original data and maybe do a comparison to check something, and maybe we do something there. So again, sky is the limit. You can kind of do as many queues as it makes sense, and whichever order makes sense as well. So kind of going beyond that, how do we activate our queues? So typically, as I showed before, we have that admin form, but I also like to create a drush command so that we can call it via the command line. So again, but that one might require, getting a file from a URL or specific directory. I have instances where, some process puts a file in a certain directory. I grab it with my drush command and then I run my process there. So it'll still use the import service. So regardless of if it's coming from the form source or it's coming from my drush command, the import manager is still doing all the work for me. And that's why it's really handy, because instead of having some functionality for the form and some functionality for the drush command, why not just use one source, right? Keep it the same. So kind of getting into import scheduling and automation. So why schedule an import? So it allows it to not be manual trigger. Again, we can still have manual triggers if we need to, but this is so you can run, say, something at like 2 a.m. in the morning, right? I don't have to be up and I have to press a button and make sure it runs. I'll just know it will run. Or if you need to coordinate with other processes. So in my example of dropping off a file, what if this thing drops a file off at 1 a.m. in the morning? I got to run my thing at 2 a.m. Again, I'm not going to be up and waiting. Oh, is the file there? Make sure it's there before I press the button. We can do all that. We can coordinate that as well. To do so, we can use cron tabs, cron jobs. Who's used cron tabs or cron jobs before? Hands up. Hell yeah. So cron tab stands for cron table. Did anybody know that? Hands up. Less people. Nice. Yeah, it's a pretty little fun fact. So it's a file that contains the schedule of cron entries to be run. And a cron job is a specific set of execution instructions specifying day, time, and one or more commands to execute, because you could chain commands if you want to. So for all those who aren't aware of the syntax, we have minute, hour, day of month, day of week, and then the command. I have a command right now that specifically runs January 1st of every year, one time, because it does like an annual report. So it's very hyper-specific. But I also have some that runs at 2 a.m. every night. So we can have kind of some different things. Or something that only runs Monday to Friday at 2 a.m. And then some examples. So if we want every minute, all the stars. Stars are just say everything. We can do every 5 minutes with a /5. We can do every hour, so that's on the minute of every hour. So minute 0. Very particular times. So at 10 a.m., 1 p.m., 4 p.m. every day. Maybe at 12, Monday to Friday. Oh yeah, my example, specifically on January 1st. So, getting into gotchas. Custom importers are custom, of course. And there's nothing really out of the box for you to start with. Granted, because I've been doing them for so long, I have my pre-skeleton structure that I can grab and use and leverage and improve and keep doing that. So, I mean, once you have your tool, you can keep working with it. And then wrapping your head around the Q API is also kind of a learning curve. It's like, oh, gets and saves and populate, and how does this go to there, and what's going where, and I don't know when to do stuff. So even just that is a little bit of a mind trick. Something that's also very important to note is a queue will be processed when cron runs unless you exclude cron from your queue annotation. So if you wanted your queue to run on cron, you put it in. If you don't, which most of the time I do not, because you don't want it to run every hour, because we run cron every hour usually for those kinds of things, we take that out. And another downside, there's not necessarily a way to roll back the same way that migrate does, right? When you do a migrate and you're like, oh, something's wrong, roll back. Custom importers is you throw it in. The other thing too I like custom importers again for is you can, multiple importers, right? So it's like every night I want to import something every time. Some scheduling and automation gotchas. So when you're creating them, time zones, shout out to Martin for time, because he mentioned in his talk, and daylight savings time need to be considered. So I've had times where, I'm scheduling something and I'm thinking, oh yeah, EST, but you're putting it in and that system is thinking, oh, I'm, like UAT or right? So it's like, I gotta be okay. I have to offset my stuff by 4 hours, but then when it's daylight savings time, sometimes it's 4 hours and sometimes it's not 4 hours. So I've had times where it might run on the day before because I didn't run it close enough. So there's a lot of that. You have to make sure you're like, okay, time zone offset, daylight savings time offset. So I try to run things at like 2 or 3 in the morning so that we don't kind of get into that weird midnight, I'm over the lap. And also when you're scheduling overnight, there's not necessarily a guarantee the cron job won't fail, right? It just could fail and you're sleeping and you're like, I hope it worked. I'll find it in the morning. But I would definitely recommend adding logging, maybe even email notifications. So it fails, sends everybody an email. Say, hey, I didn't run. Here's a bunch of errors that I found. or even just having a log in general just to monitor is really nice. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening, and comments and questions. Let me see those hands. Yes.
You were kind of trashing migrate as being too complicated, but I kind of felt like you dug into the queue method and it almost came out looking as complicated as migration does. Can you say what you avoided by using, or what you could really use the queue one aside from the complexity that you wouldn't want to use migrate for?
Yes, so the question was, I was trashing migrate, let's put that on the record. And why would I pick custom over migrate? Because custom does have a lot of code, you're not wrong. I don't know, I just find, I don't do a lot of migrate myself, but I find whenever I look at it, it looks very daunting, very complicated. There's a lot of different files, a lot of different plugins going on, a lot of different sources. Where I find that this is it's either in the base or it's the manual, base or the manual. So it's a little bit more broken down. It's a little bit more everything I need to know is in this one file. So I find it's a bit more organized. But again, to your point, there's still a lot of code, still a lot of maintenance. But once you've kind of built up your structure, it's really easy to go. But that's not to say that migrate isn't the same way. Because once you this is my plugin for doing this to this, I can use it again. So it's not to say that it's not the way to do. All of those, the feeds, migrate, custom importers, all the way to go. I just prefer custom importers because there's a lot of benefit that I like out of it. And I just find the file structure, because I believe you have to make a bunch of YAMLs, right, for migrate. So you're getting into YAML land, and that's you've already lost me at YAML. So I just find that it's there's a lot more that's a little different, whereas I'm just working in normal land on my custom stuff. But again, yeah, migrate is good. Don't get me wrong. We use migrate for large migrations for sure.
Okay, so you talked about migrate versus heroes. What do you do about rollbacks?
Well, and that's where the kind of the gotcha comes in. There's not really a good way to roll back, which is where migrate wins.
If you have to.
Yes, if you have to roll back. So yeah, sorry, the question is, what about rollbacks? Yeah, there is hard, I would say. But typically too, a lot of the scenarios is, we're running those, a lot of those imports are constantly running. It's not just a one-time thing. It's we run it overnight. And let's say, the source data was wrong or something, and it ran some weird data, and then they fixed it on the source. You just run it again. And it fixes it, right? So that's kind of the benefit too, is that it's always running versus a one-time thing. But to your point, there's no rollback. So if you're I hate this, I don't know how to get rid of it, you probably have to back up the database or something like that. Yeah. So it's a little messy there. So migrate wins a little bit.
That's not the point.
No, I know. Yeah, for sure. Yes?
Just a comment on the difference with migrate. When everything's in PHP, you can have
This is true. So yeah, just to put that in there, trying to debug migrate versus a kind of a custom import, yeah, I can put logs out everywhere, right? Whereas migrate, a little harder to do. I could even run xdebug. Who's used xdebug before? Hell yeah. So I can do a lot of that kind of stuff. I've even done ones too where I mentioned logging. In a form, I've enable logging, and it super logs everything, and then I turn it off, and then it doesn't log a bunch of stuff, right? And I can just have that, which is nice. I've even done ones too where it validates for me if the import ran properly. So if I'm expecting it to import something, so one scenario is I'm expecting it to import into a specific database table. I check if anything's in that database table, right? If so, validation, yes. So I have one type of importer where it does a bunch of checks and it says, okay, which step of the importer failed? And it'll tell you, and then print out the error message. So a lot of that helps as well. You can do something like that as well. So, yeah.
If you're using migrate, more than likely you're writing plugin, so you can get the benefit of custom code
Yes,
to,
yes, for sure, yeah.
unless you're importing the user state, which is simple.
Yes, yes, exactly. So yeah, there are pros and cons. Definitely, I'm not saying never use migrate. I'm not saying never use custom importers. This is time and a place,
Yeah.
for sure. Like, I've done site migrations with this method, but we've also done migration methods with migrate. So there's not necessarily a go-to. Sometimes it's preference. I really like this way, but I've also done normal migrations as well. So I just find this is good for recurring stuff a lot. So yes.
I wonder if you looked into using validators for the validation part of the code you're writing? Because I know, it looked like you kind of liked having everything in one file, but Symfony validators are pretty sweet, right? So, yeah, you could put those in for the validation part.
Yeah, so just to repeat, if I looked into validators, not specifically, but that's not a bad idea. But yeah, I think it depends on your use case too, right? Like if it's very particular validation, then maybe you have to write your own thing. But if there's something that is there that you can just say, hey, check this for me, that'd be great.
Well, you could reuse them then from project to project, right?
Yes, for
So,
sure.
little bits.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. The reusability, yeah. I've used this kind of template again over and over, and I've been repeatedly trying to change it all the time and enhance it as well. So, yeah. Questions? More questions?
Sure.
Yes.
Are you able to use, maybe I missed it, something like Guzzle or curl to bring stuff in from an API?
Oh yeah, 100%. So that's, and I probably should have put that in kind of in the populate step. So in that populate, it could be from a file, it could be from an API call, could be from multiple API calls. I've even had one where it has to page through that API, and it's like, okay, give me page 1, now give me page 2, now give me page 3. And go boop, 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 shove that all in, process it, save it. Which again, you can't really do as much stuff like that without that kind of approach, I find. So it is very flexible. But I've also had ones where it's like, I gotta call like 4 API calls to get all my data because they're all living in different spots. And I can do all that when I populate. Or maybe I have different queues specifically for those things. Like for example, we have one where it's like, I have to import courses for like a university before I import programs, because the programs are gonna reference the courses. But the courses are so complicated that they're coming from a different source, and the programs are coming from a different source. So I could do all that at the same time, but that's like a lot to do, and maybe I split them up where it's like, this one does courses, then I run programs right after, and it's gonna then reference those after, right? So there's lots of different approaches there, for sure. Any other questions?
I got one more, if that's okay.
Yes, you're allowed as many questions as the time allows.
When you do the actual import, is it like an upsert method, or is it like a brand new create method?
Like when we're creating the content?
Yeah, so like just say, like you have 5,000 things you're bringing in, but only 4 things have changed.
So, good point. It's not in this. It was a little bit more advanced than I wanted to put in here, but I have handled that before. So, the way that I've done that recently is, so I import, for example, a file that's 300,000 lines. And I split those ahead of time, because trying to read that file in, good luck. So before I even do anything, I split that file into chunks of 5,000. So I have about 60 files, which is a little bit more manageable. Also going to take some time, but that's okay. Then what I do is I grab the row and I hash it. And I say, okay, that hash, and then so like let's say I grab that row, I save it, I save the hash. Then it comes in again. I hash it again. Does the hash match? If it does, probably didn't change. The likeliness of those hashes matching, I don't know what the percentages are. But you're like, okay, so I'll just skip it and say, sorry, I don't want to do that. So to your point, 4 things change, I'm only going to say 4 things. However, I've also done ones where it's like, but what if I want to track active things? And I want to delete the things that aren't in the file. I also got a solution for that too. So the hash matches, we're still going to track it. If we save it, we're going to track it. So we're still tracking that it's active, but we don't necessarily have to save it. And that also saves a lot of time.
And you do it in that clean method after, right?
You can do it in the clean. The tracking that I usually do it in, if I can find it, is so it would be in like the base class parse. So I would I would do that hash and then say, do I even want to include it in the save queue, right? Or just skip it. Yeah, and then after, you can do, in a clean queue, after the fact, you can say, okay, now, maybe I delete all the old ones that aren't in my, like, you were active state, and I'd leave them for later. And you can put, what I've done is I've just had like a database table that tracks like maybe a node ID and the hash, and then maybe the date that I did it just for fun. And then it's light to look up. It's not like you're loading the entity to look it up. So you're just like, does the hash exist? Is it there? If not, this is my active table, and I'm going to track it. Anything that's old, I'll delete it from the table, and then I'll delete it for real. So that's a good question.
Oh, that's going to be a queue.
Pardon?
Are you talking about a queue?
Oh, no, like a custom table to track
Okay.
that hash, specifically that. Because it's not even going to get into the save queue. It's going to be in the get queue, because we don't know yet if it's there or not, but then we can process it and say, don't even go to the save
Process
queue.
it later.
Yeah. So like the save queue would only have 4 things, as opposed to like 5,000. So we still have to process it, because we don't, well, actually what we could do even before we do, and I think I do it too, before we do the process data, right? Before we do that, we do the hash thing. So we're not even wasting that time. We're just saying, raw data, get it out of here. We don't care. Why waste processing it if we're not going to save it anyways? So we catch it early is the kind of the key. But yeah, that's actually come up because, as you may think, the 300,000, that's a lot of processing data, and that takes a lot of time. But if we're like, give me the difference, I'll figure out the difference, then we're golden. So it runs it's much faster. So, any other questions?
Did you cover logs?
Yes. So the logging, I would recommend you could probably sprinkle it in through this whole thing. This doesn't necessarily have logging, but I would definitely, you could probably make your own log, like a custom log, have a custom view.
I meant the log for like the audit, for the user to look at your own, or yourself to look.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
This may have changed. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, you could even track that as you're going, and then like track that to maybe like a state variable or something, or some kind of something, and then shove that in like an interface. So there's one specifically I have that again tracks like where, like it has say maybe like 6 steps of the import. It's a little different than this, but it does use the queues. But it's like which step failed, and then why it failed. And then you can see, but like the first 3 passed, and that's okay. So we know the point of failure, and then it prints out like a custom error that I control, but maybe it's like, it's some whatever error I found, but I could say like, oh no, this failed my validation. Like this was supposed to be a full table, but it's empty. That's the problem. And then I can figure out, okay, that's where it failed in the code, figure out what the problem is. A lot of the times, spoiler, it's the data's fault. It's not my fault. Let's just put that on the record. It's the data's fault. No, but sometimes it is though, because bad data could mess up the whole thing, right? But again, that's why we have that validation for the header. Header doesn't match, I'm not importing nothing. So that's kind of the rule. But you can still get bad data regardless. If
Your
you're,
customers are always right that they're bad.
I'm not going to put that on the record. But yes. But sometimes, but trying to figure out the issue is the hardest part. Because whether it's a code issue, whether it's a data issue. But we try to put things in to alleviate those and try to figure out not whose fault it is. It's really just where's the error, how do I fix it? Is kind of the key, right? So, perfect. So yeah, I think we're at time. But happy to chat about this after too, if people want to chat. Yeah.